A black waitress sent to a burning basement for spare napkins found a chained Korean man bleeding out in the smoke. She had 30 seconds to choose: run for her life, or save a stranger the world had already decided to let die. The smell of smoke hit Grace Mitchell at 11:43 p.m., right as she was wiping down the last booth. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours straight, double shift at Mel's Diner on Crenshaw, the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the tips were always short. Her lower back ached. Her sneakers had worn through at the heel. And her bank account was sitting at a cool $314, which meant she was exactly 12 days away from eviction. Again. Grace tossed the rag into the gray water bucket and exhaled slowly, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying wasps. The diner was finally empty. Just her, the hum of the ancient refrigerator, and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen where Paolo was finishing up. She glanced at the clock. 11:44 now. If she clocked out by midnight, she could catch the last bus and still get 6 hours of sleep before her morning shift at the dry cleaners. Mitchell! Grace's shoulders tensed. She turned to see Dale, the night manager, leaning out of his office doorway. Mid-50s, thinning hair, perpetually annoyed expression. He had the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled without being paid to. Yeah. Grace kept her voice neutral. She'd learned not to give Dale attitude even when he deserved it. Especially when he deserved it. Basement. We're out of napkin refills. Grab 3 boxes before you go. Grace's jaw tightened. The basement. Of course. Can't Paolo. Paolo's busy. You're not. Dale's tone left no room for negotiation. 3 boxes. Back storage. Go. He disappeared back into his office before Grace could respond. She stood there for a moment, staring at the basement door behind the kitchen. The one with the peeling authorized personnel only sign that everyone ignored because no one actually wanted to go down there. The basement was a concrete tomb that smelled like mildew and rodent droppings, filled with 20 years of forgotten inventory and broken equipment the owner was too cheap to haul away. The lights barely worked. The stairs were uneven. And more than once, Grace had heard scratching sounds in the walls that she preferred not to think about. But Dale had asked, which meant it wasn't really a question. Grace grabbed her phone from her apron pocket, turned on the flashlight, and pushed through the kitchen. Paolo glanced up from the industrial sink, suds up to his elbows. Basement? He asked, sympathetic. Yup. Good luck. Watch the 3rd step. Still loose. Grace nodded and opened the door. The smell hit her first. Damp concrete. Rust. Something sour and organic that made her nostrils flare. She hesitated at the top of the stairs, phone light cutting through the darkness below. The pull chain light at the bottom was burned out. Again. Of course it was. Grace descended carefully, each step creaking under her weight. The air grew colder as she went down, the kind of cold that clung to your skin and made you want to turn around. She reached the bottom and swept her phone light across the space. Shadows leaped and twisted. Boxes stacked haphazardly. Old fryers. A rusted prep table missing 2 legs. The napkin supplies were in the back corner, naturally, behind everything else. Grace picked her way through the maze of junk, her breath fogging in the chill. That's when she smelled it. Smoke. Not the old, stale kind that clung to the walls. Fresh smoke. Acrid. Chemical. Grace stopped moving. Her pulse kicked up. She turned slowly, phone light scanning the ceiling. A thin gray haze was gathering near the far wall, coiling like a living thing. And beneath it, she saw the flicker, small, orange, angry, licking up the side of a cardboard box stacked against the old electrical panel. Oh, hell no. Grace spun toward the stairs, but froze mid-step. Because that's when she heard it. A low, rasping breath. Pained. Human. Her light swung wildly across the basement, and that's when she saw him. A man. Chained to the support pillar in the back corner, half collapsed against the concrete. His shirt was torn and soaked through with blood. His head hung forward, dark hair matted and wet. His wrists were bound with heavy chains bolted directly into the pillar, and his hands, his hands, were swollen and bruised, the skin split open in places. Grace's breath caught in her throat. The man's head lifted slightly, just enough for her to see his face. Asian. Korean, maybe. Mid-30s. Face battered, one eye swollen shut, blood crusting his split lip. Their eyes met. He said something in a language Grace didn't understand, his voice barely a whisper, and then his head dropped again. The fire popped behind her. Louder now. Spreading. Grace's mind screamed at her in her mama's voice, "Don't you get involved, girl. You call 911 and you get out. Right now." She'd learned that lesson young. Learned it at 10 when she'd seen Mr. Rashad from 2 doors down get jumped and she'd frozen on the porch, too scared to move. Learned it at 15 when her cousin Deshawn got shot outside a house party and the only witnesses were the ones who ran. Learned it at 23 when she tried to report her landlord for harassment and ended up with an eviction notice instead. Getting involved meant becoming a target. It meant risking everything for people who wouldn't do the same for you. Grace's hand was already pulling out her phone, thumb moving toward 911. But she stopped. Because the fire was spreading faster now, tongues of flame crawling up the wall toward the old wiring. The smoke was thickening. And if she ran, if she called the cops and waited for them to arrive, this man would die. Chained. Alone. Burning. Grace squeezed her eyes shut. "This is not your problem," she whispered to herself. "This is not your problem." But her feet weren't moving toward the stairs. Her daddy's voice echoed in her head, the one from the stories her mama used to tell. "Some folks run from fire, Gracie. Your daddy ran toward it. He died pulling a stranger from a burning car when Grace was 6. She barely remembered his face now, just fragments, his laugh, the way he'd lift her onto his shoulders, the smell of his cologne. But she remembered what her mama had said at his funeral, "Your father was the kind of man who couldn't walk past someone in need. Even when it cost him everything." Grace opened her eyes. The man's chest was still rising and falling. Barely. "Damn it," she hissed. She shoved her phone in her pocket and ran toward him, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. The heat was building, the air shimmering near the flames. Grace dropped to her knees beside the man, her hands going to the chains. They were thick, industrial, padlocked to the pillar with a heavy master lock. "Hey," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me?" His good eye cracked open. He said something again in Korean, urgent, desperate. I don't understand," Grace said, panic rising in her chest. "I'm gonna get you out, okay? Just stay with me." She pulled at the chains. They didn't budge. Behind her, something exploded with a sharp crack, a paint can, maybe, or an aerosol, and fresh flames erupted across a pile of old uniforms. The basement was an oven now. Grace could feel the heat on her back, could taste ash in her mouth. She looked around frantically. Tool. She needed something to break the lock. Anything. Her eyes landed on a rusted crowbar leaning against the far wall. Grace lunged for it, grabbed it, and sprinted back. She wedged the flat end into the lock's shackle and pulled with everything she had. Nothing. Come on, she screamed, throwing her whole body weight against it. The lock held. Smoke was pouring across the ceiling now, thick and black. Grace's eyes were streaming. Her lungs burned with every breath. The man's head lolled to the side. His breathing was getting shallower. Grace repositioned the crowbar, braced her foot against the pillar, and pulled again, grunting with effort. The shackle bent. Just slightly. Yes. Come on, come on. She pulled harder, muscles screaming, and with a metallic shriek, the lock snapped open. The chains fell away. The man collapsed forward, and Grace barely caught him, his weight nearly dragging her down. Okay, I got you, she gasped, looping his arm over her shoulders. He was heavy, dead weight, and Grace was 5'5" and 130 pounds soaking wet. But she'd carried her drunk uncle home 3 blocks when she was 17. She'd hauled 50-pound bags of rice up 4 flights of stairs at her old apartment. She could do this. Grace staggered toward the stairs, half dragging, half carrying the man. The fire roared behind them now, flames consuming the back wall. The old electrical panel sparked and hissed. They were almost to the stairs when the man's knees buckled and they both went down. No, Grace sobbed, trying to pull him back up. Please, you gotta help me. He mumbled something, eyes rolling back. Grace looked up at the stairs. They were so close. 10 feet. Maybe less. The ceiling groaned above them. Grace made a decision. She grabbed him under the arms and dragged him. 1 step. 2. Her shoulders screaming. Her vision blurring. The basement door flew open above them and Paula's shocked face appeared. Grace? Help Emmy, she screamed. Paolo thundered down the stairs, and together they hauled the man up and out into the kitchen just as the basement ceiling collapsed behind them with a deafening crash. Grace and Paolo stumbled into the dining area, laying the man on the floor. Grace collapsed beside him, coughing so hard she thought her lungs would tear. Dale was there suddenly, phone already pressed to his ear, barking their address to 911. The man, bloody, broken, barely breathing, turned his head slightly and looked at Grace. He whispered something she couldn't hear. Grace leaned closer, her hand instinctively going to his. You should have left me, he rasped in heavily accented English. Then his eyes closed. Grace would learn his name 3 hours later in the ICU waiting room, when the detective with the tired eyes and the expensive suit sat down beside her and asked if she understood what she'd just done. His name was Lee Min-jae. And saving him had just made Grace Mitchell the most dangerous witness in Los Angeles. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To the choices that led Grace to that basement in the first place. To understand how a broke waitress ended up in the crosshairs of a Korean crime syndicate, we need to go back. Not to the fire. To the moment Grace Mitchell first saw Lee Min-jae and didn't run. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories reach. And if you're drawn to true tales of power and mafia stories like this, hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. The basement had been burning for at least 10 minutes before Grace descended those stairs. She knows that now. Knows that the fire wasn't accidental, wasn't faulty wiring or a forgotten cigarette. Someone had started it deliberately, methodically, and left it to do its work while they disappeared into the Los Angeles night. But in that moment, standing at the bottom of the stairs with her phone's flashlight cutting through thickening smoke, Grace's only thought was, why is there a man chained in my diner's basement? He was slumped against the support pillar like a broken marionette, his body held semi-upright only by the chains wrapped around his wrists. Heavy industrial chains, the kind used to secure motorcycles or gate locks, bolted directly into the concrete pillar with expansion anchors that looked professionally installed. This wasn't improvised. Someone had planned this. Grace took a step closer, her sneakers crunching on broken glass she hadn't noticed before. The man's head was bowed, chin against his chest, dark hair falling forward to obscure his face. His dress shirt, expensive-looking, she noted absently, silk or something close, was torn open, buttons missing, fabric stained rust-brown with dried blood. Fresh blood too. A slow drip from somewhere beneath his ribs, pattering onto the concrete in a rhythm that matched his shallow breathing. "Hey," Grace called out, her voice cracking. "Can you hear me?" No response. She moved closer, and the details emerged like a photograph developing in chemicals. His face was a canvas of violence. Left eye swollen completely shut, the skin around it purple-black and grotesquely puffy. His bottom lip split in two places, crusted with dried blood. A gash across his right cheekbone, deep enough that Grace could see the bone beneath. His jaw was misshapen, broken, probably, and when he breathed, it was with a wet, rattling sound that made Grace's stomach turn. Someone had beaten him. Systematically. Professionally. This wasn't a mugging gone wrong or a bar fight. This was torture. Above them, the ceiling popped like a gunshot, and a shower of sparks rained down near the electrical panel. The fire was spreading, feeding on the decades of accumulated junk. Grace's hands went to the chains, trying to find a weak point, a release mechanism, anything. The metal was cold and unforgiving under her fingers. The padlock was industrial grade, the kind that would take bolt cutters or a blowtorch to break. "Shit, shit, shit," she muttered, pulling uselessly at the chains. The man's head lifted slightly, and Grace found herself staring into one brown eye, the other still swollen shut, that held a strange mixture of confusion and resignation. He said something in Korean. Weak. Hoarse. The words meant nothing to Grace, but the tone was clear. "Leave me." "I can't," Grace started, then stopped. Because she heard it. Footsteps. Not from the kitchen above. From somewhere else in the basement. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving through the maze of storage toward them. Grace's blood turned to ice. The fire hadn't been an accident. And whoever started it had come back. She looked at the man chained to the pillar, at Lee Min-jae, though she didn't know his name yet, and saw the fear flash across his battered face. He said something else in Korean, more urgent now, and gestured weakly with his head toward the stairs. "Run," his expression said. "Run while you still can." The footsteps were closer now. Grace could hear voices, low and male, speaking in rapid Korean. She made a choice in half a heartbeat. Grace killed her phone's flashlight and dove behind a stack of collapsed cardboard boxes, her heart hammering so hard she was certain they'd hear it. She pressed herself flat against the concrete floor, tasting dust and ash, and watched through a gap in the boxes as two figures emerged from the smoke. They'd come back to make sure he burned. And now Grace was trapped in the basement with them. The two men moved through the smoke like they owned it. Grace pressed herself flatter against the concrete, barely breathing, watching through the gap in the cardboard boxes as they approached the pillar where Min-jae hung in his chains. The first man was tall, lean, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket. He held a phone to his ear, speaking rapid Korean. His tone was irritated, impatient. The second was shorter, broader, with a shaved head that gleamed in the firelight. He carried something in his right hand, Grace couldn't see what, but the way he gripped it made her skin crawl. They stopped in front of Min-jae. Leather Jacket ended his call and pocketed his phone. When he spoke, it was in English, accented, but clear enough for Grace to understand. "Still breathing," he said, nudging Min-jae's leg with his boot. "Stubborn bastard." Min-jae's head lifted slightly. He said something in Korean, weak, defiant. Leather Jacket laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Your own men, Hyung, he said, switching back to English like he wanted Min-jae to feel every word. That's what happens when you forget where your loyalty belongs. When you think you're too important to touch. He crouched down, getting eye level with Min-jae. Cleaning up your mess. That's all this is. Nothing personal. The broader man said something in Korean, a question, maybe. Leather Jacket responded without looking away from Min-jae. 5 more minutes, he said in English. Let the fire finish what we started. Then we go. Grace's mind was racing. His own men. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was an execution. Internal. Planned. And they were going to stand there and watch him burn. Above them, something in the ceiling groaned. The fire was spreading faster now, consuming the old wooden support beams. Smoke was pouring down in thick black sheets. Leather Jacket stood, brushing dust from his knees. Goodbye, Min-jae Hyung. Give my regards to your father when you see him in hell. They turned to leave. Grace held her breath, willing herself invisible, praying they wouldn't look her direction. The men disappeared back into the smoke, their footsteps receding toward whatever exit they'd used to enter. Grace waited. 10 seconds. 20. Her lungs were screaming for air. Finally, she crawled out from behind the boxes, coughing, eyes streaming. Min-jae's head turned toward her, that one visible eye widening in shock. You, he rasped in English, the word barely intelligible through his broken jaw. You, still here? Grace scrambled to his side, her hands already going to her phone. I'm calling 911. We need. No. The word came out sharp, panicked. Min-jae tried to move, and the chains rattled violently. No police. They will kill you. Kill us both. They're already trying to kill you. Grace shot back, but her thumb hesitated over the screen. My men, Min-jae said, each word clearly costing him. Everywhere. Police, city hall, hospitals. You call, they find us. You understand? Grace stared at him. Who the hell are you? Dead man, he said simply. If you stay. Above them, the sprinkler system suddenly engaged with a metallic clank. Nothing happened. No water. Just a pathetic hissing sound and a few drops that evaporated before they hit the ground. Of course the sprinklers didn't work. This building was held together with rust and prayer. The fire roared louder, as if sensing its victory. Part of the ceiling collapsed near the back wall, sending up a cloud of sparks and ash. The heat was becoming unbearable. Grace looked at Min-jae, at this broken, bleeding stranger who'd been betrayed by his own people and left to die in a burning basement. She looked at her phone. At the 911 she could call that might bring more enemies than help. She looked at the stairs, and the escape they represented. Then she looked at the crowbar she dropped earlier, lying 3 feet away on the concrete. Your men did this to you? She asked. Min-jae managed the smallest nod. Then screw them, Grace said. She grabbed the crowbar, positioned it against the padlock, and set her feet. If we're dying, she said, we're dying trying. She pulled with everything she had. The crowbar slipped. Grace's hands, slick with sweat and ash, lost their grip, and she stumbled backward, nearly falling. Her palms were already blistering where the metal had dug into her skin, red and angry and screaming. She repositioned, braced herself against the pillar, and pulled again. The padlock didn't budge. Come on, she screamed at it, at the fire, at the universe that had decided tonight was the night everything went to hell. Min-jae's head lolled forward. His breathing was getting shallower, more labored. The smoke was so thick now that Grace could barely see 3 feet in front of her. She could still run. The thought appeared in her mind like a whisper, seductive and reasonable. The stairs were right there. 20 feet, maybe less. She could make it. Call 911 from outside. Let the professionals handle this. She'd tried. That was more than most people would do. Her hands loosened on the crowbar. And then she saw him. Her father. Not really, it was just smoke and exhaustion playing tricks, but for a moment, Grace saw Thomas Mitchell standing at the bottom of the stairs in his garage coveralls, grease under his fingernails, that crooked smile on his face. She was 6 years old again, sitting on the porch while her mama explained why Daddy wasn't coming home. Car accident on the 405, her mama had said, voice hollow. Your father saw it happen. Saw the car flip. Saw it catch fire. Grace had asked the question that had haunted her for 20 years, why didn't he just call 911? Her mama had looked at her with eyes full of tears and something that might have been pride. Because there was a man trapped inside, baby. And your father couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. The smoke cleared. Her father was gone. But Grace was still here. I'm not leaving you, she said. She wedged the crowbar deeper into the lock's shackle, planted her feet, and pulled with everything she had left, all her fear, all her exhaustion, all her rage at a world that chained people and set them on fire. The shackle bent. Groaned. Snapped. The chains fell away with a crash. Min-jae collapsed forward, and Grace caught him, his weight driving her to her knees. He was semi-conscious, mumbling something in Korean, his body dead weight in her arms. Okay, Grace gasped. We gotta move. Can you stand? She tried to lift him. He got 1 foot under himself, then his leg gave out. He couldn't walk. Grace looked at the stairs. At Min-jae. At the fire consuming the back wall. She made her decision. She hooked her arms under his shoulders and started dragging him backward toward the stairs, one agonizing foot at a time. Her shoulders screamed. Her lungs were on fire. Every breath was knives. They were halfway to the stairs when the ceiling groaned, a deep, apocalyptic sound. Grace looked up just in time to see the support beam crack. No. The ceiling collapsed. Not all of it. But enough. A section of concrete and rebar and burning debris crashed down directly onto the staircase, blocking it completely. Their exit was gone. Grace stared at the rubble, at the wall of flame and smoke, at the impossible barrier between them and survival. Then she looked around the basement, searching desperately for another way out. And saw it. A small window near the ceiling on the far wall. Boarded up. But there. Hold on, she whispered to Min-jae. They weren't done yet. Grace dragged Min-jae toward the window like a woman possessed. Her arms burned. Her lungs were full of ash. Every breath was agony, but she couldn't stop, because stopping meant dying and she hadn't come this far to die in a basement. The window was 8 feet off the ground, half covered by a rotting plywood board. Grace could see a sliver of night sky through the gap, stars, freedom, air that didn't taste like death. She propped Min-jae against the wall beneath it. His head lolled to the side, eyes rolling back. Stay with me, Grace commanded, slapping his face lightly. Hey! Stay awake! His eye cracked open. Confused. Fading. Grace grabbed an overturned milk crate, slammed it against the wall, and climbed up. The plywood board was nailed in place, but the wood was soft with rot. She wedged her fingers into the gap and pulled. The board splintered. Came away in chunks. Behind her, something exploded, paint cans or aerosol, she didn't know, didn't care, and fresh flames erupted across the ceiling. The heat was unbearable now, like standing inside an oven. Grace ripped the last of the plywood away and punched out the remaining glass with her elbow. Cool night air rushed in, and she gasped, gulping it down. Okay, she panted, climbing down. Your turn. Min-jae was barely conscious. She got him upright, looped his arm over her shoulder, and together they staggered to the wall. Getting him onto the crate was like lifting dead weight. Grace's legs shook. Her vision blurred. But she got him up. She boosted him toward the window, pushing from below while he tried weakly to pull himself through. His body scraped over broken glass. He made a sound, half groan, half scream. And then he was through, tumbling onto the sidewalk outside. Grace scrambled up after him, her hands screaming as glass bit into her palms. She pulled herself through the window and fell hard onto concrete, landing beside Min-jae's motionless body. For a moment, she just lay there, staring up at the sky, breathing. Then she heard voices. Fire! Somebody call 911. Grace lifted her head. They were in the alley behind the diner. People were gathering, late-night stragglers, someone from the bar next door, Paulo standing in the diner's back doorway with his phone pressed to his ear. Dale was there too, staring at Grace and Min-jae with an expression somewhere between shock and fury. Grace, what the hell? The explosion cut him off. The basement windows blew out in a shower of glass and flame. Fire erupted from every opening, and the building groaned like a dying animal. Grace grabbed Min-jae's collar and pulled, dragging him away from the building just as the entire basement section collapsed inward with a deafening roar. Smoke and ash billowed into the street. Car alarms screamed. People were shouting, running. Grace collapsed onto her back, Min-jae sprawled beside her, both of them covered in blood and soot and broken glass. In the distance, sirens wailed. Getting closer. Grace turned her head and looked at Min-jae. His chest was still moving. Barely. His face was a mask of blood and ash, but he was breathing. She'd done it. She'd saved him. Paulo appeared above her, dropping to his knees. Grace! Jesus Christ, who is this? What happened? Grace opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. The sirens were louder now. Fire trucks. Ambulances. Police. And somewhere in the chaos, Grace heard footsteps running away into the night. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen them escape. Grace's hand found Min-jae's, and she held on as the world dissolved into flashing lights and voices and the suffocating realization that this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The fluorescent lights in the ICU waiting room made everything look dead. Grace sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time she moved, a thin hospital blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at her bandaged hands. Second-degree burns on her palms. Smoke inhalation. Minor lacerations. The ER doctor had wanted to admit her for observation. She'd refused. Because 3 hours ago, she'd pulled a dying man from a burning basement, and now 2 LAPD detectives were sitting across from her asking questions she didn't know how to answer. Detective Morris was older, white, with tired eyes and coffee stains on his tie. His partner, Detective Kim, was younger, Korean-American, watching Grace with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Let's go through it one more time, Morris said, his voice patient but firm. You went down to the basement for supplies. Napkins, Grace corrected. My manager sent me for napkins. Right. Napkins. And you found this man chained to a support pillar. Yes. Did you recognize him? No. I'd never seen him before. Did he say anything to you? Grace hesitated. He was speaking Korean. I don't speak Korean. Detective Kim leaned forward. Nothing in English? Nothing at all? Grace thought about Min Jae's broken whisper, my own men. About Leather Jacket's voice, cleaning up your mess. He was barely conscious, she said carefully. I was trying to save his life, not have a conversation. Kim's eyes narrowed slightly, but Morris nodded. You did a brave thing, Ms. Mitchell. A lot of people would have run. I should have, Grace muttered. Why do you say that? Because some part of her already knew. Already felt the shift, the way the detectives kept glancing at each other, the way hospital security had been stationed outside the ICU since the ambulance arrived. Who is he? Grace asked quietly. The detectives exchanged a look. Ms. Mitchell, Kim said slowly, the man you saved is named Lee Min-jae. Does that name mean anything to you? No. He's a person of interest in several ongoing investigations. Organized crime. Racketeering. We believe he's a high-ranking member of a Korean crime syndicate operating in Los Angeles. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Mafia. She'd saved a mafia boss. His organization believes he's dead, Morris added. The fire was meant to eliminate him. You weren't supposed to be there. Grace's hands started shaking. She gripped the blanket tighter. Am I in danger? Neither detective answered immediately, which was answer enough. We're going to have officers stationed outside your apartment, Morris said finally. Just as a precaution. A precaution. Grace almost laughed. Almost. Can I see him? The words came out before she could stop them. Kim frowned. Why would you want to? Because I almost died getting him out of that basement, Grace snapped. I want to see if it was worth it. Morris nodded slowly. 5 minutes. He's sedated, but he's stable. Min Jae looked smaller in the hospital bed. Machines beeped around him, tubes and wires connecting his broken body to devices keeping him alive. His face was clean now, the blood washed away, revealing the full extent of the damage. Stitches across his cheekbone. His jaw wired shut. Bandages wrapped around his ribs. Grace stood in the doorway, suddenly unsure why she'd come. Then his eye opened. The one that wasn't swollen shut. He looked at her for a long moment. Recognition flickered across his face. You, he whispered, the word barely audible around the wiring. You should have left me. Grace stepped into the room. Yeah. Probably. Now, you're in danger. Because of me. I gathered that. Min Jae's eye closed. I'm sorry. Grace didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what to say to any of this. She turned to leave. Why? His voice stopped her at the door. Why you stay? Grace looked back at him, at this stranger who'd somehow become her responsibility, her burden, her consequence. I don't know, she said honestly. Then she walked out, past the detectives, past the security guards, out into the hospital parking lot where the sun was starting to rise over Los Angeles. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord about late rent. Grace stared at it and started laughing. Because 24 hours ago, her biggest problem was making rent. Now she'd saved a mafia boss's life, and nothing would ever be normal again. Dale fired Grace over the phone. "The diner's closed for repairs anyway," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. "And when we reopen, we're gonna need staff we can trust not to burn the place down." "I didn't," Grace started, but the line was already dead. She sat on her couch in her tiny studio apartment, staring at her phone. 48 hours since the fire. 12 hours since she'd left the hospital. 0 job prospects and $314 in her bank account. Outside, a black sedan idled across the street. Same one that had been there yesterday. Different driver, but same watchful stillness. Grace stood and moved to the window, careful to stay behind the curtain. The driver was on his phone, but his eyes never left her building. Her own phone rang. Unknown number. The third one today. She didn't answer. It rang again 5 minutes later. Then again. Then stopped. Grace felt her skin crawl. She'd changed her number twice in the last 2 days. Somehow they kept finding her. A knock on her door made her jump. She looked through the peephole and saw a man in a dark suit. Asian. Professional. Not threatening, but not threatening either. "Ms. Mitchell," he said through the door, his English precise and unaccented. "My name is Jean. I work for Mr. Lee. May I speak with you?" Grace's hand hovered over the deadbolt. "I don't know any Mr. Lee." "Yes, you do. You saved his life 3 nights ago." Against her better judgment, Grace opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "What do you want?" Jean held up his hands, showing he was unarmed. "Mr. Lee is concerned for your safety. We have reason to believe the people who tried to kill him are now aware of your involvement. The police are watching my apartment. With respect, Ms. Mitchell, the police cannot protect you from these people. Mr. Lee would like to offer you secure accommodations until the situation is resolved." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Jin's expression didn't change. "Then you'll be dead within a week." The secure accommodations turned out to be a penthouse apartment in Koreatown with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and 2 armed guards stationed in the hallway. A gilded cage. Grace stood at the window on her 3rd day of captivity, because that's what this was, no matter how nice the furniture, watching the city below. Her city. The one she could no longer safely exist in. Her phone, a new one Jean had provided, sat on the counter. No personal contacts. No social media. No connection to her old life. She'd been erased. Behind her, the apartment door opened. Grace turned, expecting Jean with another security update. It was Min Jae. He moved carefully, still healing, one arm in a sling, his face still mottled with fading bruises. But he was walking. Standing. Alive because of her. "You shouldn't be here," Grace said flatly. "Aren't you supposed to be dead?" "Technically." Min Jae stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. "How are you adjusting?" "I lost my job. My apartment. My entire life." Grace's voice was rising now, weeks of fear and frustration boiling over. "I can't call my friends. Can't go outside. Can't do anything except sit here and wait for your people to tell me it's safe. I'm trying to protect you." "I didn't ask for your protection," Grace shouted. "I didn't ask for any of this. I should have left you in that basement." The words hung in the air between them. Min Jae's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. "You should have." Grace turned away, her hands gripping the window frame. I want my life back. That life is gone, Ms. Mitchell. The moment you pulled me from that fire, it was gone. Grace's reflection in the window showed a woman she barely recognized. Trapped. Transformed. No longer the broke waitress scrambling to make rent. Now she was something else entirely. A liability. A witness. A woman who'd saved the wrong man's life. She turned back to face Min Jae. Then what am I now? His answer was simple. Devastating. Mine to protect. Whether you want to be or not. Min Jae didn't leave after that conversation. He sat down on the leather couch, wincing slightly, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Outside, the city glittered with 1,000 lives continuing as if Grace's hadn't just imploded. I had a brother, Min Jae said finally, his voice quiet. Younger. Smarter. Better than me in every way that mattered. Grace turned from the window but didn't sit. Had? He died 3 years ago. Car accident. Or that's what we were told. Min Jae's jaw tightened. I found out 6 months ago it wasn't an accident. It was an execution. Ordered by my father's second-in-command. A man I called uncle. The man who chained you in that basement. Min Jae nodded. Park Jin-woo. My father's most trusted advisor. When my father died last year, I inherited control of the organization. Jin-woo smiled at the funeral and plotted my death the entire time. Grace finally sat down, across from him, maintaining distance. Why tell me this? Because you asked what you are now. And I want you to understand, you saved a man whose own family wanted him dead. There is no going back for either of us. Grace looked at her bandaged hands. The burns were healing, but the scars would remain. Physical proof that she'd reached into fire and pulled out something that wasn't hers to save. I'm scared, she admitted. All the time now. I look over my shoulder. I jump at sounds. I can't sleep because I keep dreaming about that basement, about the smoke, about dying, Min Jae finished. Yes. I dream about it too. Except in my dreams, you leave. You run. And I burn. He leaned forward slightly. But you didn't leave, Grace. You stayed when everyone else, my own blood, wanted me dead. Do you understand how rare that is? Grace met his eyes. I'm not special. I just couldn't walk away. That's what makes you special. Something shifted in the air between them. Not attraction, not yet, maybe not ever. But recognition. Two people who'd stared into the same fire and somehow survived. Jean can arrange transport, Min Jae said. New identity. New city. Enough money to start over. You'd be safe. Protected. Free of all of this. Grace heard the unspoken question. And if I stay? Then you stay in danger. In my world. With all its violence and betrayal and... With you, Grace interrupted. Min Jae held her gaze. Yes. Grace thought about her old life. The double shifts and the late rent and the endless scrambling just to survive. That life was gone. Dale had made sure of that. The police had made sure of that. Min Jae's enemies had made sure of that. But sitting here now, looking at this man who'd been beaten and chained and left to burn by people he loved, Grace realized something. She wasn't the same woman who'd gone down to that basement for napkins. That woman would have run. I need time, Grace said. To think. To figure out. The apartment door burst open. Jean rushed in, phone in hand, his usually composed face tight with alarm. "We have a problem," he said in rapid Korean to Min-jae, then switched to English for Grace's benefit. "Park Jin-woo knows you're alive. He knows Ms. Mitchell saved you." Min-jae stood, his body tensing despite his injuries. "How?" "Someone at the hospital. One of the nurses. She's disappeared." Jin's eyes flicked to Grace. "They have her name. Her address. Everything." Grace felt the floor drop out from under her. "My mother. I have a mother in Atlanta. My cousins." Already being moved to protective custody, Jean assured her. "But Ms. Mitchell, you need to understand, staying in Los Angeles is no longer an option. For either of you." Min-jae looked at Grace. In his eyes, she saw the same question from moments ago. But now there was no time to think. Only time to choose. Run and hide. Or stand and fight beside a man she barely knew but somehow couldn't abandon. Grace stood up. "Where are we going?" 6 weeks later, Grace stood on the balcony of a safe house in San Diego, watching the Pacific Ocean turn gold under the setting sun. Behind her, through the glass doors, Min-jae was on the phone speaking rapid Korean. His arm was out of the sling now. The bruises had faded to yellow ghosts. He moved with increasing confidence, still careful, still healing, but no longer the broken man she dragged from the flames. They'd been moving every few days. San Diego. Then Santa Barbara. Back to a different part of LA, Jean coordinated everything with military precision while Min-jae quietly rebuilt his network, identifying loyalists, cutting out traitors. Park Jin-woo was still out there. Still hunting. Still dangerous. But he was no longer invisible. Grace's mother called twice a week from the secured facility in Georgia. Always the same conversation, "Baby, when are you coming home?" Grace never had an answer. Because the truth was, she didn't know where home was anymore. The glass door slid open. Min-jae stepped out, pocketing his phone. "Jean has a lead on Jin-woo's location. We might be able to move within the week." "Move how?" Grace asked without turning around. "Offensively. Instead of defensively." Grace finally looked at him. "You mean kill him?" Min-jae didn't flinch from her directness. "I mean end the threat. Permanently." "And then what? You go back to running a criminal empire?" "I go back to, what exactly?" Min-jae moved to stand beside her at the railing. "I'm offering you a choice, Grace. Again. Jean can still arrange new identity, new city. You'd be safe. Protected. You could start over. Without you. Without this life." Grace watched the waves crash against the rocks below. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a waitress worried about rent. Now she stood in a safe house discussing assassination plans with a mafia boss like it was normal. Nothing about this was normal. But nothing about that night in the basement had been normal either. "I keep thinking about what you said in the hospital," Grace said quietly. "You should have left me. You were right. I should have run. Should have called 911 and saved myself. Yes. But I didn't. And you know why?" Min-jae turned to look at her. "Because some people are worth saving. Even when they're chained in the dark. Even when it costs you everything." Grace met his eyes. "You were worth saving, Min-jae. And whatever comes next, Jin-woo, your organization, all of it, I'm not running now." Something shifted in Min-jae's expression. Not gratitude. Deeper than that. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition that they'd both been transformed by the same fire. This won't be easy, he warned. Nothing worth doing ever is. Min-jae's hand found hers on the railing. Not romantic. Not yet. But solid. Real. A connection forged in smoke and ash and impossible choices. Behind them, Jean appeared in the doorway. We need to move. Now. Grace squeezed Min-jae's hand once, then released it. They went inside together. Later, much later, when Grace looked back on that night in the basement, the smoke, the chains, the moment she chose to stay instead of run, she would understand something fundamental about herself. She'd always thought her father's death was a tragedy. A good man destroyed by his own heroism. But maybe it wasn't destruction. Maybe it was transformation. One night. One decision. One stranger in the dark. Her old life had burned away in that basement, yes. The waitress, the double shifts, the scrambling for rent, all of it reduced to ash. But from those ashes, something else had emerged. Someone else. Grace Mitchell had walked into that fire alone. She'd walked out belonging to something bigger than survival. Not love. Not yet. But something just as unbreakable. Because some fires destroy everything they touch. And some fires forge bonds that even death can't break. The war with Park Jin-woo was just beginning. But Grace was no longer afraid. She'd already survived the flames. Everything else was just heat.